In this video, we will show you how to replace your front wheel bearing and hub assembly on this Ford F-150. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. We're going to have to make our way into the engine compartment just above where our wheel well is so we can gain access to our ABS wire connector. Now on the driver's side, if you are making your way down along the air filter housing, the closest wire connector is the ABS wire connector here. Now on this connector, you should find that you have a red locking tab that we need to carefully pull out and away, and then we can squeeze on the tab that's located behind it to unlock this and separate it. It can be difficult to take hold of this with your hands, so I'm just going to use a small prying device. We'll pull that red tab out and away. And now I'm going to squeeze on that tab and we'll try to separate this. Once you have it disconnected, a quick inspection of both ends to confirm there's no corrosion, and we can continue on. Continuing on, we're going to remove the wheel by removing all 6 of our 21mm lug nuts, and we can get this off of here. Now that we have the wheel off, let's pay attention directly in the center of the wheel bearing hub here. You're going to find an axle nut cover. We have to remove this cover. I'm going to be using some pliers for this. Go ahead and take hold of that. We'll give it a wiggle, rock it back and forth, and pull it out and away. Once you have that off of there, a quick inspection to make sure it's not rotted or damaged in some way. You will be reusing this. We'll set it aside. Behind that area, you're going to find a 15mm headed mounting nut. Let's remove that. After applying penetrant in this area, we'll continue on with a hammer and punch. The punch is going to go directly in the center of your axle shaft. We'll go ahead and lightly tap on this, separating it from the wheel bearing located behind it. Now once you have movement from this area, we'll continue on. Now let's pay attention to where the ABS connects onto the strut tower, up inside this area, just behind the fender liner. We'll have to dislodge this. We need to create some slack here. I'm using a trim tool. You can use pretty much anything as a prying device. Now we're making our way down to where the ABS wire makes its way onto this flex hose bracket. Keep following that ABS wire. We have a plastic holder for that ABS wire on the flex hose itself. Now we have an 8mm headed mounting bolt here holding the ABS wire to our knuckle. Quick inspection of that cable, looks good. In that same area, we have a 10mm headed mounting bolt holding the flex hose bracket to that front steering knuckle. We'll remove this. Before we start removing our caliper, it's going to be a little bit easier to gain access to our 2 mounting bolts if you can pivot this from side to side. So we'll make our way over to the front outer tie rod end. As for removing the outer tie rod end, if your mounting nut has a cotter pin, you want to go ahead and remove that. We'll be replacing it. Use a 21mm to remove that mounting nut. A quick inspection of that. The next thing we'll do is start this on upside down. We'll make sure it's level with the stud of the tie rod end, and we'll start lightly tapping on this area, breaking it free from the steering knuckle. Just check that mounting nut, no damage. Remove the tie rod, a quick inspection of that as well. Now we can pivot this as necessary. Let's start having a look along the backside where you can see the caliper and your front axle. Looking just above the axle, you're going to find 2 vacuum hoses leading to your 4-wheel drive actuator. We can go ahead and disconnect those. Typically they just slide up and out of place. If you do have to pry on them, just be careful not to cause any damage. Now once you have those off of there, just a quick inspection to make sure they're both soft and pliable. Not torn, worn, or damaged. Those look good. Now along the back side here, you can see 2 21mm headed mounting bolts. We're going to remove the pair. Starting with the upper one, we'll fully remove it, start it back in just a couple threads. If anything looks like it's rotted, weak, or damaged, you do want to replace that. Now, as we remove the final mounting bolts here, we're going to make sure we're holding onto that caliper so it does not fall down and potentially cause any damage. When we hang this aside, we'll make sure we put no pressure on our flex hose. When you remove the caliper, just have a quick inspection of the brake pads. You can see those right in this area. If it looks like they're worn at an angle or damaged in any way, you'd want to go ahead and replace them. I'm just going to use a small hook here and we'll hang this up and out of the way. Let's remove our brake rotor. Quick inspection, set that aside. Let's start removing our ABS wire from its passageway. Making its way up along the frame here, you can tell it actually makes its way in between your brake line and the frame. During the installation process, that's the way that the ABS wire will have to go. We'll bring this down towards the wheel bearing. Now with it down in this area, we can continue on to our 4 pieces of mounting hardware coming from along the backside. They make their way through the wheel bearing. You can see the threaded portion right along here. We'll be using an 18mm for each of these 4 mounting bolts. There's 2 on the rearward side and 2 along the front. Now I've got this spun so we can see the forward mounting bolts. Now we have the hardware out of here. We're going to continue on with some penetrant in between where the wheel bearing and the steering knuckle connect. After applying penetrant, we're going to remove the wheel bearing from the steering knuckle. To remove the wheel bearing from the steering knuckle, there's several tools that you can use. One of the most common would be a hammer. You just want to lightly tap on this, and we're going to try to separate it. Once you start seeing some movement coming from along here, you can try from a different area and we'll slowly work this out of position. Just be extremely careful. When it does come loose, you do not want it to come off and potentially hurt you. We'll just make sure the ABS wire makes its way out behind that backing plate. Remove the bearing. There it is, friend. Now that we have the wheel bearing out of position, the next thing we need to do is clean and inspect the mounting area. Not just along the outside here, but also inside of this port. When cleaning in here, we're not going to use any type of parts cleaner. We don't want to cause any damage. For the outside, I'm just using a small scraper. Now I've cleaned that up as well as possible. We'll continue on with some high temperature lubricant. If you were looking inside here, you can see your axle and you can see your 4-wheel drive actuator. There's a whole bunch of little splines or teeth looking things here. We're going to add some high temperature lubricant. You don't need very much, just a light coating. After coating in that area, we're going to use some copper anti-seize along the area of the knuckle where we had removed the bearing from. We'll make our way along the inner port here and just along this outer edge along all 4 ears. Once again, just a light coating will do. All right, let's get ready to install that brand new wheel bearing. We're going to start with the wheel bearing, sliding it onto the knuckle and the axle shaft right here, but we also need to pay attention to our ABS wire, making sure it goes in and behind the backing plate. You want to do that before fully pressing in the wheel bearing. Just slide this in here. Now as you press that in, you're going to continue on with your 4 mounting bolts, making their way from the inboard side and in through the knuckle into that wheel bearing. Now I've applied some blue thread locker after cleaning the threads on the mounting bolts. We'll start these in. Once all of them are started in, you can snug them up. The torque for these is 129 foot-pounds. Let's just start in the other two real quick. Once you've snugged all 4 bolts, and you're sure the wheel bearing is flush to your knuckle, we'll go ahead and torque these. Now let's pay attention to our wheel bearing hub. We need to add some copper anti-seize to this. After that, we can continue on with installing our brake rotor. Now let's install our brake rotor. Once you have that in place, just continue on with one of your original lug nuts. We're going to hold this rotor in place. We'll continue on with the caliper. Let's get this caliper in place. We're sliding the brake pads over our brake rotor. Continuing on, we'll be paying attention along the back side here. It's time to install our 2 mounting bolts. I've applied some blue thread locker. For those mounting bolts, go ahead and start them in, snug them up, torque them to 184 foot-pounds. Let's install those vacuum lines onto the hub actuator here. Just line them up, press them on. There we are. We'll just give that a little tug, make sure it's properly secured. If it's loose, you can use a wire tie if necessary. Now let's secure our flex hose. That goes in this area right along here. Use our 10mm mounting bolt. Go ahead and start it in, snug it up. Now it's time for our ABS wire. Let's make sure we have it in the proper orientation. We'll have it so it's facing down like this. Continue on with your 8mm headed mounting bolt. Start it in, snug it up. We can continue on securing that ABS wire. It's going to make its way up the flex hose. We're coming up to the bracket now. Press that in there. Now continuing up past here, as you remember during the removal process, it had to go in and behind this brake line. Bring that right up there. Our next mounting point is going to be right up in this area. There it is. Just double check, make sure that's secured. We'll take the rest of this and put it right up along top here. It's time for the outer tie rod end. We'll take that tie rod end, slide it down and through the knuckle, start on our mounting nut, snug it up. The torque for this is 85 foot-pounds. Now, once you have that nut torqued, if you have a castle nut, you need to make sure the castle nut slot is properly aligned with the port that makes its way through the tie rod end. If it's not, you need to continue tightening the nut until the very next slot is. After that, continue on with your locking cotter pin. A little further. That looks aligned. Let's press that through and pin it over. Let's get this lug nut off of here. We'll continue on with our axle nut directly in the center. Go ahead and start that on, bottom it out. The torque for this is 30 foot-pounds. Now typically when I try to torque an axle nut, I'm going to put a pry bar diagonally past the lug studs, being extremely careful not to cause any damage, making its way all the way down to the ground. That'll prevent this from spinning on us while we continue torquing. Still locking nuts, we just need to make our way all the way down. There we are. Remove your bar. Install your protective cover. We'll align this, use a rubber mallet to drive it into place. Double check, make sure that's seated all the way around. Now it's time to install the wheel. We'll get this up in position, start on all the lug nuts. Once they're bottomed out, we'll get the wheel back on the ground and torque them to 150 foot-pounds. We'll be snugging and torquing in a crisscross manner. Get this on the ground. Torqued. Up above the wheel well, we'll continue on with our ABS wire. Just go ahead and line that up, press it in. We'll listen for a click from that, a light tug, lock it down with your red locking tab. Just press that in. Okay friend, we've got our vehicle back together. The next thing you need to do is go ahead and take it for a road test, listen for any odd noises, make sure you have no ABS light, test the four-wheel drive, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.